You've heard stories about homemade stock that cooks all day. But does it have to? I'm going to show you how to make a rich, savory chicken stock that you can use in all your favorite soups, stews, and sauces. This technique only requires a few ingredients, and it only takes about an hour. By the way, this lesson is from our Classic Soups class, out now on ATK Classes on the America's Test Kitchen app. In this class, we'll show you how to build rich soups with complex flavor, from starting with aromatics and picking the right stock, to safely pureeing for a velvety finish. I'll also show you how to make buttery croutons to top the best ever broccoli cheese soup. Learn all this and more at your own pace, and have fun while you do it. But first, I have 4 pounds of chicken pieces here. I'm using backs and wings because they have the best meat to bone ratio, and also they contain the collagen, which makes our broth rich and unctuous. You could also use chicken legs. They have the same properties, but in this case, we're using backs and wings. I'm gonna chop them into 2-inch pieces to increase their surface area, and also to open up the bone to release the marrow, which will also be flavorful in our homemade stock. Many of my pieces are prepped here, so I'm gonna set this off to the side and get to work on these last few pieces. I'm using a cleaver for this. A cleaver is a piece of kitchen equipment that you don't use that often, but when you need it, you need it. I understand why people are intimidated by cleavers because it's a scary tool, but you don't have to be intimidated because you actually use it just like you use a knife. It's a stronger blade, it has a stronger spine, and overall it's thicker than a chef's knife, but you use it in much the same way as you would use a chef's knife. So to cut these pieces, I'm gonna first establish myself a place where the cleaver is gonna go by cutting through the skin, and I've hit the bone now, so I'm just gonna rock back and forth. And you can hear the bone snap, and then make one long slice, and look at that. I'm gonna make this piece a little bit smaller, so I'm just gonna cut it right at the joint, which is a much easier cut to make. But you don't wanna be a wild caveman. You don't want your cleaver swinging all over the kitchen. You wanna make sure your hand is out of the way before you chop anything with it. So in this case, it's fine because we're making our slice, and then we're gonna push and rock. But this bone actually turns out to be significantly bigger. So what are we gonna do with this? I'm gonna change my grip. I've been using a pinch grip, so I use a thumb and a forefinger to hold onto the blade. But if I'm gonna have to drop this down, if I'm gonna have to use the weight of the cleaver onto the bone, I'm gonna pull back a little bit. So I'm gonna hold it like I'm shaking hands. And with this hand way out of the way, I'm gonna drop the weight of the cleaver. Again, it's not a Captain Caveman kind of smash, it's just using the weight of the cleaver to drop it. And now we can rock it because we're partway through the bone. And look how well that worked. And see how we've opened it up? We can see how we've exposed the marrow, exposed more meat. Let's take a look at a different type of piece. This is a back, and I'm gonna just cut this into 2-inch pieces. So I'm gonna do it the entire time because the back is the back. I'm gonna use the weight of the cleaver. I'm gonna get my hand out of the way. I got my handshake, and we're cutting, we're cutting, we're cutting. Look at that. I love that cleaver. I'm just gonna finish up these last 2 pieces, wash my hands, and give this area a good cleaning before we continue. When we're making a traditional chicken stock, we generally start with a variety of vegetables, with some onions and carrots and celery, and then we'll throw in a bouquet garni, which is a collection of herbs. But we're trying to focus today, not just fast, but delicious. So we're focusing on the chicken flavor. So we've narrowed down those ingredients, and we're just going to use an onion and a couple of bay leaves. The bay leaves will give us those herby notes, and the onion will give us the vegetal. We're starting with a tablespoon of vegetable oil. I'm turning my heat to medium-high. We want to get a little bit of heat in the bottom of the pan before we put our onion in. But it looks like it's shimmering now, so I'm going to put in my onion. We're looking for this to be lightly browned and slightly softened, about 2 to 3 minutes. We're maximizing the flavor we get out of each ingredient. So a good example of that is the onions here. We want to be sure that they're slightly browned and that they've left a little bit of their flavor in the bottom of the pan. So these look like they are in good shape. I'm going to turn off the heat and spoon them into a bowl. Now it's time for the chicken, and I'm going to use half of it at a time. The reason we're using half the chicken at a time is because we're developing a fond on the bottom of the pan. And if we have too much chicken in there, it's gonna release too much liquid and it's not gonna form a nice brown fond. And that's the flavor that we're looking for our stock. I'm gonna let them cook on the first side. Then when they're lightly browned, I'll flip them over. It'll take about 4 or 5 minutes. Our chicken is browned on 2 sides. So we're gonna put it right here in the bowl with our onion. Look at all that flavor. That's just from half of the chicken. Once we get the other half put in that, we're gonna really have a flavor bomb in the bottom of this pan. We do have to be careful, however, not to let our fond burn with the second batch because that's gonna ruin the flavor of our stock. Don't be afraid to lower the heat if you see it getting too dark or if you're afraid the fond is about to burn. So we'll add the rest of our chicken now and let that brown up just the same as the first batch. Our chicken is lightly brown now, but even more important, we can see a nice, much darker fond. It didn't burn, thank goodness, but it is nice and deep brown, and that's the flavor that we're looking for. So now we're going to apply another time-saving, flavor-adding technique. Everybody goes into the pot together. This is the first half of our chicken plus all the onions. We're gonna stir them together, and then I'm gonna put the top on and turn the heat down to low. This technique is called sweating. There's still a fair amount of liquid in the chicken here to release into the stock. And so instead of just watering it down right now, we're gonna sweat it. We made a little sauna with the top and the low heat, and in about 20 minutes, we'll see what we made. Let's see how we're doing in our sauna. Oh, yes. Exactly what we were hoping would happen. Look at this beautiful dark brown liquid. That is all flavor in there. Now we're gonna turn our flavorful liquid into stock by adding 8 cups of water. Then to that 8 cups of water, this is when our 2 bay leaves go in. And also 8 teaspoons of gelatin. This is another shortcut technique. In long cooking stock, the collagen in the chicken converts to gelatin. But we're gonna shortcut that today by adding 8 teaspoons of unflavored gelatin to our stock. That'll cut our cooking time down by at least a couple hours. And finally, 2 teaspoons of salt. We want to add seasoning now, but not too much seasoning because chicken stock is generally used as an ingredient. If I were to over salt it now, if I was to put in, say, a couple of tablespoons of salt, and then I wanted to reduce it to make a sauce, it would be altogether too salty. You can always add salt, but you can never take it away. I'm going to turn this up now and bring it to a simmer. We've reached a simmer. So it's time to turn our stove way down so that we stay on a bare simmer. I'm gonna put the lid back on and we're gonna let it go until it's rich and flavorful. It's gonna take about 20 minutes. Our stock is almost finished, but I wanna show you something. Generally, when you're making stock, all this stuff rises to the top. And by stuff, I mean coagulated proteins, things that the chicken has let off that we don't necessarily want in our stock because this is gonna make it cloudy. So to get the clearest stock that we can, we're gonna use a wide, flat spoon and we're just gonna skim off what's on the top here. And it's time to strain our stock. So I have a fine mesh strainer set over a large bowl here. I'm gonna put pieces in, press them down to extract as much liquid as I can because that is where the flavor is. And then these are gonna be discarded so they can go into a scrap bowl over here along with our scum and keep going until you have all your chicken strained out. Our chicken is all out of the pot, but we still have some onion and some bay leaf, so we're gonna do one last strain by picking up the pot and pouring it right into our strainer. Same as we did with the chicken, we want to squeeze as much flavor out of these onion bits and bay leaves as we can. Now we're done with the cooking part. We're going to let this sit on the counter and let the fat rise to the top so we can skim it off. That's going to take about 5 minutes. Now that the fat has settled on the surface, we can carefully skim it with the same spoon we used before. The stock is ready to use now, or you can cool it to room temperature and refrigerate it or freeze it to use later. Homemade chicken stock is liquid gold when it comes to building great flavor in other dishes. Knowing how to make a full flavored stock with body and complexity is a key step on your journey as a cook. Now that you've tackled homemade stock, you're ready to take the next step. And with ATK Classes, you get access to a wide variety of lessons filled with masterful techniques, helpful videos, and step-by-step photos. From knife skills in making pizza to baking and frosting incredible cakes, and so much more. Download the America's Test Kitchen app and start learning with ATK Classes today.